Hello everyone and welcome to another Houdini tutorial. Today we are going to make a decomposing jack-o'-lantern. This is kind of building off of the idea of the melting chocolate bunny way back in during Easter time, if you remember. It's basically the same concept. We're going to be melting an object, but we'll be adding a little bit of color to make it look like it's decomposing, and then we'll also be doing like separate color for the actual body of the pumpkin and the stem. So I guess first things first is we'll make a new project and save. Okay, now that we have our project all set up, let's go ahead and model our actual jack-o'-lantern. So I'm going to drop down a geo node here, and we'll just call this one Jack. That will be his name. And we'll drop down a sphere. And this is not going to be to scale because each one of these squares is a meter. But in order to play nice with our particles, we actually want to really beef up this jack-o'-lantern to make it a lot bigger, because when we add a mesh surface to our particles, it's going to want to seal up any holes that we made into the pumpkin. So in order to kind of help avoid that, we can make our pumpkin a lot bigger. There's also settings that we could technically do on our surface and our particles, but whenever I try to mess around with that, it doesn't exactly give me the results that I'm looking for. So I find that this way is just a lot easier to make our actual model a lot bigger. So let's add a ton of rows, ton of columns, and up the uniform scale here quite a bit. Maybe, yeah, let's do like 6 for now. We can always adjust it later. And then since it's a pumpkin, it's kind of more squashed. It's not like a perfect sphere or anything like that. So let's just smush the y-axis just a little bit. All right, so now that we have our basic sphere here, we can add our ridges of our pumpkin, because we all know a pumpkin's not perfectly smooth. It has the ridges that go down each side of the pumpkin. So we can do that by selecting all of our edges that we'd like to shrink down a little bit. So first let's group these up, and then we'll do a soft transform. So if you see it's color-coded right here, the red is what's going to be affected the most, and the yellow is going to be just softened into it. So we can adjust that by adjusting the soft radius scale, make it a little bit wider. And then we can decrease the scale and just kind of shrink it in. And you can just play around with the parameters here, try to get the ridges of a pumpkin. That looks pretty good to me. I think we're okay with the body. Now let's go ahead and carve our actual pumpkin. Let's make triangle eyes and a mouth. You can transform this in any way that you'd like. So I'm just going to put the template on our body here, and let's start making the eyes. So I'll drop down a grid and put the display flag on there. Let's make this triangles and rotate this 45 degrees. Then I'll just delete the bottom primitives. So we have a nice triangle shape, and transform them into the positions that I'd like. All right, that looks good for the left eye. And then I'm just going to hold Alt and left click to make a second one. And bring him over here. We will merge those together so we can see both of them. And then you can adjust each one by each transform node. That looks good for now. We can always adjust it later. And let's drop down a poly extrude, because we're going to be using these triangles to cut into our body. So we want them to overlap with the actual body of the pumpkin. So make the distance, and make sure to output the back, because we want these to be solid objects. So now let me show you what I mean with cutting it into the body. We'll do a Boolean, wire this into A and B. And we have our pumpkin, but you can see that our Boolean turned our body into a solid object. So if you go up here and say treat as a surface, it'll just make it a hollow object. So we have our eyes of our pumpkin. Now we can go ahead and create a mouth. So I'll just do a line. And this probably goes without saying, but you can carve your pumpkin however you'd like. I want the direction to be on the X. Oh, I'm sorry. I want my pumpkin to be on my Z scale. Make it a little bit longer. And I want about 5 points on it. And so when we select our points, we can scooch them up and make like a zigzaggy, pumpkin-y face. We can make our line just a little bit bigger with a poly wire. Add more divisions. Make the wire radius a lot bigger. The bigger the mouth, the better results you're probably gonna get. So like I mentioned earlier, we don't want our particle mesh to collide with each other. So we want nice, big, open spaces. Just to make sure that it covers our Boolean all the way, I'm going to stretch it out just a little bit more. This way I know it'll pass through my pumpkin just where I want it to be. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Let's just drop down another Boolean. Same deal here, you want to treat A as a surface, so it carves it in. And we have our jack-o'-lantern body. I think all we need to do now is add a stem to him. Let's just do like a tube. And I'll put the template here, add our tube. We want him to have end caps. Make it a polygon. Move him up. Give him lots of rows and columns. Tall. And then I want to warp this stem, so let's drop down a bend node. So he needs a capture region, he needs to know what object to manipulate, so I want to manipulate this stem right here to right here. And we can bend him, actually set him let's do the opposite direction. So set capture region, let's do it from the bottom up. And now we can bend him, curve him a little bit. Then we can actually taper him right here. Hit this enable button and we can taper him close. Looks pretty good. I'm just going to move him up a little bit with another transform. And then right here for our body, it'd probably be a good idea to poly extrude him. That way we can fill him up with particles. Make sure when you poly extrude him, make sure to output the back so then he's an actual full object. And we will merge him with our stem. Need to bump up the stem. Once we did a poly extrude, he got a little bit of volume. And we have our spooky jack-o'-lantern. I think I'm actually going to move up these points a little bit. He looks a little too messy for my liking. No, otherwise I kind of like the more messed organic look. It kind of looks a little more realistic to me. But if you did want cleaner cuts in the eyes and the mouth, you could probably poly extrude before you did the Boolean, and that would give you clean, straight cuts. But I think I'm going to leave it with this. It looks a little more organic. Just go through and manipulate the points that look really weird. But other than that, other things that you might want to do, pumpkins aren't exactly smooth like this. They're a little bit bumpy, so you could drop down a mountain node and just manipulate it a little bit, but not too much, otherwise it gets like way too jaggedy. Alright, so I'm liking how our buddy Jack is looking. He looks like a real jack-o'-lantern. Let's do a null, so we can reference him later. We'll call him Out Jack. And hop up one level. So now we can turn our object into particles. So let's select Mr. Jack here and go to our viscous fluids, and we want melt object. And this is going to make a dot network for us and a fluid. This is where we turn our particles into an actual particle fluid. So let's clean this up. We'll add a network box, and we'll just call this one Geo, and this is where Mr. Jack will go. And then we'll add one more. Get out of there. We'll add one more. We'll call this one Fluid. This is where we'll put our dot and our Jack fluid. All right, so when we hop in, we can see our big old bounding box here. This is where everything's being computed. We can lower this a little bit. Let's first drop down a ground plane, and we'll move him below Mr. Jack. Solver selected, we can decrease the size of this. And you can see that our particles are this orange color, and that means that they are going to melt immediately when I hit play. Not exactly what we want. We want it to be solid, and then we want a heat object to melt it. So if we go into our flip object here, and under physical, we want the temperature to be 0, and then our particles will all turn black to represent what temperature they are, so they won't melt. And then we need to bump up the viscosity quite a lot. So now when we hit play, I'm going to lower the, increase the particle separation just while we do some trial and error. This is going to lower the amount of particles. Because our object is a lot bigger, it's going to take a lot longer to cache. So we're just going to up the particle separation while we mess around with it a little bit. So let's see what it looks like when I hit play. The first frame usually settles the object, but you can see that Mr. Jack doesn't move at all. He's just a solid object. That's what he's considered right now. So now we want a heat source to come through and start decomposing our jack-o'-lantern. So first we need to create our heat object. So let's go to a geometry. We'll call this one heat source. And inside we'll just create a simple sphere. We want it to be about as big as Jack. Maybe stretch him out, because we want him to come from this top section and then hit him and pass through him. Maybe we'll up the frequency and drop down a mountain. That way it's not like a smooth melt. It looks like it's melting at random intervals. Increase the element size and the height. And then let's uncheck this brain, because we don't want our particles trying to work while we are animating our heat source. So we'll do a transform node, and then at 1, let's have him be over here, just away from our actual pumpkin himself right now. We want to see him before he's melted, and we will keyframe this at 1. And then let's say all the way to 240. We'll just do a standard 10-second simulation. We want him to cross into the pumpkin. Now, it might be a good idea to keep him away from the stem because the stem typically doesn't decompose as fast as the body of a pumpkin. So we can actually, I just want to rotate this a little bit so he doesn't hit the stem as much. It's okay if the stem melts a little bit. It's not a big deal. But he'll come across here. Let's keyframe these. And so as time goes on, let's hit this real time. This is our heat source. And as it's going to be colliding with our particles, it's going to be increasing the temperature of them. It'll be melting them a lot more. Okay, we'll drop down a null and call this one out heat source. Hop up one level. And we want to heat with an object. Select object to heat with. Well, our heat source. Now select fluid object to heat with. So let's go into our DOP network and select our flip object, press enter. So now, in theory, when our heat source goes across our particles, it'll make the temperature a lot hotter. Oh, don't forget to turn back on the brain because gonna stop it right there. There's a couple things that I'm noticing here. So I want to first point out our temperature color right here. So you can see that white is the hottest temperature. This is what's going to melt the fastest. Then it's yellow, orange, red, then black. So that's the temperature gauge for it. Another thing I want to do is just uncheck this heat source because I can't really see the particles with that in the way. So now we can see that the pumpkin is actually like decomposing, it's shrinking. So that looks pretty good. One also thing that I noticed is it doesn't start melting until well into our simulation. So I want to make our heat source a little bit closer. We want it to start keyframe just a little bit closer to our pumpkin so it just starts going through a lot quicker. But I did notice that it wasn't quite melting as fast as I would like, and to increase the temperature output of our heat source, we can go here in our pop attribute by volume node right here and increase our output range. Maybe we'll just try like 1.1 first. All right, let's see what our object looks like now. All right, I'm gonna stop it right there. Let's adjust the heat source here. Turn off this brain near the end at 240. I want it to pass through the pumpkin. All right, turn back on the brain up here at the OBJ. I think if you are happy with the results, you're probably good to decrease the particle separation. It's just high right now, so it loads a little bit quicker. You can adjust, make whatever settings. When you're happy with with the results that you have, you can then decrease the particle separation to make your pumpkin look more like a pumpkin and less like a bunch of particles. So I think I'm going to lower this to maybe something like 0.7 because my pumpkin itself is actually already pretty big, so it's kind of making my computer chug. If you have a good computer, you're good to have a big object and lots of particles. Good on ya. Actually, I do want this to look a lot better, so maybe 0.05, and I'll just wait for it to finish caching. You can see that our pumpkin's really defined right now. Looks good. So now we're good to hop into the caching phase. Let's go up one level and go to our Jack fluid. And so what's happening in our DOP network is being displayed right here in our DOP import. It's not connected to anything. It's just to give us a visual representation of what's happening. And then it's basically the same thing. The DOP.io and the DOP import are the same thing. So when I hit the display flag, you see nothing changes really, because it's pulling the same kind of information. So now here is where I want to separate the stem from the body, because I want them to be different colors, and I want the body to be changing as it decomposes. I want it to turn black. So let's separate it here. Let's go to this stop.io and click on the select, and I just want to select our stem. So if we go to our front and zoom out, Let's just select the points of the stem. Up one, perspective. You can see I accidentally selected some of that, and that's not what you want. So hold Control and drag and just deselect those points. Make sure everything else, all the other points are selected. So we have our stem all by itself. And let's just drop down a delete non-selected. So we have our stem, and let's make a copy of this delete node and delete selected. So now we have our body and our stem as two separate entities. So we're going to have to cache these separately. So right now our stem is selected. It's gonna go feed all the way down to this compressed cache. So I think it'd be a good idea to actually cache everything all at once before we delete it. So let's go to this .io, and under the geometry file, I'll select this. We'll just call this like particle cache. And go ahead and save to file. It might take a little bit depending on what your settings were, how many particles you have, how big your geometry is, so just be prepared. Alright, once you have your simulation all cached up, we can go ahead and start caching the compressed file. You are probably good to skip this step if you want, but it's usually a good idea to do it so that our particle fluid surface step can go run a little more smoothly. This is what my simulation looks like at 240. My pumpkin started to tilt the other way, it didn't collapse over itself, but that's okay. I still think it looks pretty cool, like it's just decomposing into this pumpkin-y goop. So I think that's pretty fun. I think it'll work out nicely. So we have here, we will do like a compressed cache for our stem and our body separately. So we'll start with our stem. Is this? Yeah, so this is our stem. So when we go to our compressed cache, let's just call this one stem compressed and save to disk. All right, once that's all cached up, we can load from disk, and now we can take a look at the particle fluid surface. So this is where it turns our particles into an actual mesh itself. There's a couple settings that we can do here, but it's kind of hard to tell on the stem. Maybe we should have started with the body first just so we could get a better idea of what all these do. So maybe let's hold off on the stem particle fluid for now, and let's move over to the actual body, and then we'll come back to this particle fluid surface with the body, so then we can have a better understanding of what these scales do and what you can do with the filtering. So let's go to our compress now that we wired in our body, and we'll just change this to body compress and save to disk. Alright, now that we have the compressed cached up, I can show you what I mean with the particle fluid surface. So let's hop up to the first frame, hit the display flag on here. And we have Mr. Jack here. He actually looks pretty good for what this is. You can see a little bit of these steps from the particles themselves. It's not that rounded. So we can fix that if we hop into our particle fluid surface, and in the filtering tab, there's a couple different options that we have here. We can dilate it. And if you want to see what it is, you can hover over it and it'll give you a little description of what it is. And then you could also just check it and see the results that you want. So dilate, expand the surface outward to receive specified number of voxels. That didn't quite fix our problem. So let's try to smooth it out. Maybe, let's see, a road. Alright, so we have Mr. Jack here. We can do a couple different settings for him. We can lower the droplet scale, and that'll make our When it applies a particle fluid surface over our particles, it kind of expands the area. And if you notice the holes that you have carved in your jack-o'-lantern are filling up, you might want to lower this droplet scale. I would just be careful doing it too much though, because your results can get a little weird, especially when we're melting an object like this. Sometimes you can get like holes popping in and out of your mesh that aren't supposed to be there if you lower this droplet scale too much. So just try to find a balance for it. That's one of the main reasons that I told you to make this jack-o'-lantern a lot bigger than it normally would be, because we really don't want the mesh collapsing on itself, and we don't want to have to lower this droplet scale too much. You can also, another thing that you might want to look at on this surfacing tab is the influence scale. If you hover over it, small increases can give smoother results but increase the cooking time and memory usage greatly. This is a scale on the particle separation length. So if we bump this up, it'll give us smoother results. It'll just take longer for it to cache. I think I might bump this up to something like 3.5. Let's see what that looks like. Alright, now another thing that I wanted to show you is the filtering tab. There's two things that I think would make our jack-o'-lantern look better, is the smooth and the final smooth. If you hover over them, they'll tell you what they do, and you can decide for yourself, kind of just play around with the parameters and get the results that you're looking for. Let's try some erode. And smooth and final smooth. Okay, I like that. I'm pretty happy with those results. I'm not crazy about the ripples that you get if you look at it at the side. This is from the particle separation. If we had a lower amount of particle separation, it might smooth that out more, but you just kind of have to decide how long you want to spend caching it, and if it's going to be even noticeable or not. I think I'm pretty happy with the results here, but you can play around with the particle separation. Even right here, you can lower the particle separation, although I wouldn't stray too far from what you had in our DOP simulation, because it might give you mixed results if you end up doing that. So once you're happy with how your jack-o'-lantern looks, you can cache the surface. We'll just call this like body surface, and go ahead and save to disk. Alright, so at this point, since we are doing the stem and the body like a different color, a different material, I think I'll just make a second fluid node here. So if we hold Alt and we left click and drag them over, we'll just have it's exactly the same setup. Right now it'll say we want 2 of these bodies, but that's not quite what we want. Let's rename these. Your name will be body. So here we'll have the body all wired up. And this one, we just want this stem. So now when we look at this one, it'll just be the stem. We can go through and cache this all up separately. We don't need to worry about the body or anything like that. So I believe we already compressed this. Let's stem. There we go. Okay, so we already cached up the stem. There it is. Now we can go to our particle fluid surface and just same thing as the body, kind of mess around with the parameters here for the stem. We kind of want it to look pretty rough because a stem is very, it's very bumpy. It's not like a smooth surface at all, not even compared to like a pumpkin body. So we can mess around with the parameters there. So the stem probably won't take as long as the body because it's a lot less particles to deal with. But if you just want to adjust a couple things, the droplet scale, I would be careful of this because if we lower the droplet scale too much, it's going to like float above our body, which will look really weird, like a hovering stem. So I probably wouldn't touch the droplet scale this time. Since we copied it, it still has all the same settings that we had for the body, and I do like how that, well, let's take off the smooth and final smooth, see what that looks like. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take those off, and then let's go ahead and cache this surface for the stem. Make sure to change the name, and save to disk. Okay, we got that all cached up. I think I saw what happened with our body. It, for some reason, maybe like, I needed to select a couple more points down at the bottom, but as it goes along, you can see it kind of scooches up our stem, like our body particles scooch up. It might just be like an unfortunate accident on my part. This is probably why, see how it, for some reason, the stem like slides down or something starts appearing there, and then our body right here. But if we look at the front, I don't think it'll be an issue. It'll all just look like a goopy mess anyway. See, yeah, so see how it starts running up and down and it starts glitching out right there. But that's why we are here to learn. Let's see what this looks like. We might have to go back and change it if we don't like it. I would hate to have to recache everything because it took a while, but let's figure it out. We'll learn together. That's what this is all about. It's a learning experience. So now let's change the color of our body to make it more obvious that it's decomposing and not just melting in the sun. So let's drop down a color node, wire this in, and as you know, we can ramp from any attribute, a color from any attribute. And when we did this simulation, we added a couple attributes. You can check them out if you click on this node info. And right now we have 3-point attributes: the position, the temperature, the vector. We have a name, and then we have our rest ratio, and time scale. So these are our attributes. If you remember when we were showing the particles being heated up, they were represented by a couple different colors. I told you to remember that. And so if we click on here with the temperature, we can actually see a pretty good representation of the temperature. So the hotter it gets, that's when it changes color. This is how we will show like our pumpkin decomposing. All right, so if we click on here, this is our color when nothing is being decomposed, nothing's being melted. We just want it like a basic pumpkin-y orange. So you can mess around with this setting here. Granted, we haven't applied any lights or anything yet, so your pumpkin will look different anyway, but just for now, we can select a color here, or you can get a picture of a pumpkin and reference it, which is what I have done here. I've uploaded it. All right, so I pulled up a reference picture here. This is regular pumpkin. You can click on this color picker tool, and you can just pick an orange that, like, it looks like you can do any different shade. So obviously, I think I do want it to be a little bit darker, and it will look different with a light on it. So we want it to base start with orange, and then let's say when something is completely rotted, it's gross, it's like a really dark, like almost black green. So as it heats up, it just kind of starts to decompose. That's let's add one point in the middle. So I'm just left clicking right here in the middle. Maybe we want like more of a, we want it to be more of like a gradual. And then if we go to our stem, we can do a similar thing here. Color, wire this in, ramp from attribute, and we want our temperature. And this one's normally green. Ooh, like a little darker. And then we want that to steadily turn black as well. Yeah, like sinks in, because I think what's happening is the temperature of the body is a lot hotter than the stem at this moment, so the stem sinks through. And that's what's happening to our simulation. So that's something to look out for. I think if we have it from this angle, it still looks pretty good. Alright, so let's set the scene here. So in our Geo tab, let's drop down a Geo node, and we'll just create like a wall, some sort of backdrop. We'll just call this wall. Drop down a grid. Something like that. We can apply a texture later. Let's take off this ground plane and make our own ground, because we're applying a material to that. So in our material, let's just make a couple different materials. Our first one will just be our basic pumpkin material. It'll just be white, and we'll use the point color already assigned to it for the actual color. So let's make this white, call this pumpkin, apply it to both the body and the stem. And I don't want it shiny, so let's change the IOR to maybe like 1.1. We want a little shiny. There we go. Roughness, maybe 0.4. Okay, here we'll do a wall, and I've downloaded a texture that I want to use. Just like a simple brick wall. And if you want to see the texture that you applied in the viewport, go to your actual geometry that you're applying the texture to and type in UV texture and wire that in. And you want to project it on the X. So we have like a brick texture there, and we'll do the same thing on our floor. Call this one floor. Just like a concrete. Okay, I'm gonna bump the wall up because it looks like the brick is going down into the concrete, which looks kind of weird. We want the grout, the mortar to line up with the bottom right there. I think I'll darken the floor. All right, let's apply some light. So I'll make a third network box, and we'll call this one render. Let's do an environment light. Just for when it's nighttime, we still want a little bit of light. And I downloaded an HDRI for here. You can find them online for free. And a camera. I want it to be just dead on looking at it. Okay. Now let's like make a fake sun. We'll just do a point light. Move him over. And so I want him to be, I want the sun to be in front of the pumpkin, so he casts a shadow onto the wall. Let's make him like a more of a yellow orangey color. And so we'll just animate this point light so it rotates around. We want it to be cut off from the, we want it to go underneath the floor to simulate nighttime, like right now. All right, we have our pumpkin. A couple things I'm noticing. I forgot to take off the reflection of the actual floor. And our pumpkin is looking maybe a bit too rough. I think I went a little overboard with that one. Let's turn him down. All right, let's mess with the lighting now, I think. Our environment light we want to be pretty low. We just want it to be like twilight when it's nighttime. And then since our light it's during the day, it's on its highest point, we want to bump this up. That's probably 2. Let's mess around with the wall. Let's position, I'm not quite happy with where the light's at. Okay, now that we have the light on, it looks really green. I think I want to change up that color. It actually looks like it's a gray color at first. This is why referencing is really important. Okay, yeah, sorry, once I applied lighting, I had to change up my colors a lot, so. We changed that up. Now for our point light, let's animate it. I kind of want maybe every 24 hours, I want like 2 days to pass. So I want it to transform, I want it to be animated. Right here, let's say frame 1, we want it at the top of the day. So let's just make this all uniform, 125. Let's say 25 is going to be our max on our Y scale. That's like noon time. That's when the sun is at its highest peak. So I'll Alt and left click on this translate to keyframe right there. Now, if I want 2 days to happen every 24 frames, that means 1 day every 12. So we want 4 different positions every, let's see, 12 divided by 4, that's 3. So every 3 frames, I want it to be a different position. So right now, let's say it rises in the east and sets in the west. So at frame 3, I want it to be like sunset. So let's turn this to 0, and here we'll do -25. Like more. Well, so I forgot that we moved our ground plane down a little bit. So we will change this to like sunset. Let's see, let's say -6. That's like where I want it at frame 3, -25. So from frame 1 to frame 3, I'm thinking we move it over even more than that. Let's say 30, or sorry, -30. Okay, so then at frame 6, we want it the opposite. So let's say -25 and 0. And then 3 more frames at frame 9. We'll just do the opposite. What was it? -6, I think, was the floor. And we had at 3, we had at -30, so we'll have 9 at 30. And then frame 12 should be right back up at the top. So we'll just copy and paste these frames every 12th frame. So 12 and 24. All right, let's just see what it looks like at sunset. Okay, I like that. I really wanted that shadow to be cast on the wall and the floor during sunrise and sunset. And then at nighttime, let's mess around with the environment light. You can bump it up here, maybe 0.2. All right, that looks good. Let's check out the animator editor with the transform on our point light, our fake sun. Space G. Just making sure that looks fine. No, I think that'll be good. Once you're happy with your simulation, you have everything set up, your day and night cycle, everything you'd like, you're probably good to set up the rendering options here. If you remember, I kind of showed you a little bit of things to mess around with your limits the other day. You can change your diffuse limit, your volume limit, opacity. Definitely up the pixel sample. You don't need to worry about reflection or refraction because everything is a solid object. So you don't have to mess around with that too much. Usually I change it to a physically based rendering, change it up to like 8x8, 9x9. I think I will change the floor, make it a little bit darker even. Alright guys, that should be it for today. Let me know if you have any feedback for me, if you have any suggestions, ways that you went about creating a rotting pumpkin. I love to hear from you guys, but as for me, that should be it for today. So I will talk to you guys later. Bye!